Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review the Boxtrolls. So, this, of course, is a stop motion movie, and the one thing that I can enjoy about this film is the way of which they go on and say, like, oh, the thing that you think is a monster is not actually a monster, where really the actual villains of the story are the people trying to get rid of these trolls, because the trolls are kind of minding their own business for the most point, going and scavenging, trying to find whatever someone has dumped out as trash to make it their treasure. And so we kind of have this like Spiderwick Chronicles kind of like Shrek thing going on, where eventually like Shrek is to go and have all these fairy tale creatures end up on his neck of the woods to force him to now have to go and confront Lord Farquaad and come up with something to appease Lord Farquaad, so that way all these fairy tale creatures will go away. So, so we kind of have like a mixture of stuff that I've kind of been normally watching pretty lately, anyways, like a Ghoulie or a Gremlins or like a something like that, where eventually like the good guys in the story actually are the monstrous looking things, like real monsters or something like that, where you end up having like them all living underground into these sewers, and kind of an interesting like creativity going on with the layer of these box trolls. Plus, also we have like a very interesting way that they use these boxes as a way to basically get around. So, with that said, uh, I think I kind of quickly got through like most of my thoughts about this film. Like, I enjoy this film. I enjoy the way of which that it's kind of put together. It's a rare kind of movie, but it's also just like a fun piece that I just liked. So, yeah, like that's it. That's all that I think I have here. So let's go out of our way to just go into spoilers about this one and talk about it in much more in depth and what all kind of plays out here. Because anything else that I'd probably say, like maybe I can tee up this movie. So it seems that the humans are to go into these curfews because of these box trolls existing. Hearing the fact that all these box trolls are to supposedly have this story about them where they steal children and hurt people, and really that's not the truth. And so we have Snatcher, the Archibald Snatcher, who's the kind of the leader of these exterminators who are going out and trying to find these trolls and capture and really just collect them for something I'll talk about in later on into spoilers. So we of course have Snatcher and his men. Snatcher is wanting to try to get to a higher part of society, and so I think Snatcher is just wanting to come up with some kind of deal or some kind of something so that way he can go from a red hat to a white one, because it seems that the guys with the white hats in this movie are to be living in the highest society. They have all these kind of weird assortment of cheeses, like a brie or a or these kind of cheeses from rare places and rare parts of the country and whatever what have you. And so I guess the showing of cheese is to be whoever is rich in this society of people. So, but yeah, so we eventually have one human box troll who is to be called Eggs, that is to go on and tell everybody the truth about these Boxtrolls, and nobody wants to listen to him because they have gone on and sing songs about how bad these trolls are. There is a whole like mythos and whatever created from these people, and I don't think there's ever been one really true witness of any of this stuff really happening. And so, like, there's nobody that can confirm this fact. And we even have the exterminators who are also to say that it's rare when any of these box trolls are to actually attack them or to be like portraying actual anger. And so, like, the only reason why they will go and be angry is for them to try to survive. So, with that said, these box trolls are going to have very weird, goofy names. They have weird, goofy names because every single name that they are to actually have is to basically be whatever box they're in. Like this troll right here, right in the middle here, is to be Wheels. The very one on the very bottom here, on excuse me, on this side here, right next to this girl, is to be called Fish. We end up having like the little tiny box troll here is to be called Oil Can, the one right here, and this one, of course, to be called Fragile. This one at the very bottom here, this one at the very bottom, right here, is to be called Shoes or Shoe. So yeah, whatever box they're in, you can immediately say that's going to be their name. Weirdly, because I guess they never named themselves. I guess they never bothered, and so they just like, hey, whatever box you're in, that's the name you're getting. So hence why Eggs, who is the human box troll, is to just be called Eggs. So with that said, let's go into spoilers about this one. Let's go out of our way to say that it's about that customary time. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of the film, we of course have Archibald Snatcher coming into Lord Portly Rind, who is to go and consume probably cheeses in his tasting room. We have Snatcher, who's going on and telling Lord Portly that a baby has gone missing. A baby called the Trudshaw, or the Trubshaw. Yeah, the Trubshaw baby. And so we, of course, have Lord Portly Rind, who's like, oh my god, like, a baby has gone missing, and it's all because of these box trolls? Well, like, we need to put an end to that. And Snatcher's like, like, good. Because Snatcher is to go on and mention that he is to put together a band of 3 other men and go and take all these box trolls and take them and get rid of them. And so Snatcher is to say, it's like, well, hey, if I get rid of this threat for you, will you go on and give me a white hat? Because, of course, Snatcher is to be wearing a red one. And so Portly, of course, is to be like, yeah, sure, I'll do that, maybe. Because Snatcher just wants to get a white hat and be able to go in this tasting room to eat all these interesting assortment of cheeses. And the Lord Portly Rind is like, okay, sure. Yeah, maybe. So we, of course, have the trolls all go out, and they are starting to go and grab these trinkets. We have one fish troll who at first goes and grabs this one clock and starts to get it back working again. And all of a sudden, Shu is to go on and grab it from him. And so Fish eventually goes and finds this little teddy bear that has to have this like wind up thing inside of it that all of a sudden plays music, and Fish is like, I'm gonna keep this. All of a sudden, all the exterminators are to go out to then try and collect some of these Boxtrolls. So we end up finding that 3 trolls are to be taken here. Mince, herbs, and powder are all to be taken here. And so we have both Fish and Shu conveniently getting out of there and going on and having like them go through the sewer into this big drain to eventually be conveyor belted down to their lair to go on and have Fish try to figure out where Eggs is at. This is a much younger Eggs. We eventually see Eggs kind of grow up much older here, but we have kind of like some prequel stuff to get into. So some kind of before a certain time period of this film takes place. So Fish is kind of asking everybody where Eggs is. He immediately goes to Fragile. Fragile has no clue. We of course have him go to Oil Can, and Oil Can is to tell him he's in like the place that he probably should be. And so Fish goes on and is to give Eggs this teddy bear. He plays around with it a little bit, then gives it to him. And so Eggs is to go and like hug the teddy bear, but then he like rips the head off. And the most important thing that he ends up taking is the little music wind up thing. And so he keeps that. So Eggs is to go on and realize that it's nighttime because the clock has chimed. And so all of the Boxtrolls end up going and boxing up all together and then going inside of their boxes, like all like stacked together, and Eggs is asleep on top of them. We end up also getting this one interesting visual where the Boxtrolls are to all kind of set up as stairs for one troll to eventually go and step onto, and then the troll kind of like unhooks a thing so everyone else can kind of make their way through this fence part. And I thought that was like, man, this is kind of really cool. I like how they approach this and how we kind of use these boxes to kind of make their way through their conveyor belts and stuff like that, and how to get to their lair. And so like they use these boxes pretty intelligently, I believe. So we now, of course, have Eggs, who has grown much older, and so like they're playing like music with these kind of weird assortment of things. We have like a violin like stick thing where you end up having to like play the violin with, like that little piece, and this this saw, and they're kind of using like these kind of weird goofy things to eventually make music out of certain assortment of stuff. So they're going and like breaking stuff to just kind of make music and so on and so forth. So we now get to see who these trolls are, like what's going to be like their thing. We end up having Chu, who is to have all these bugs kind of all over his face. Like there's one like bug crawling onto his face, and he's like, it's like gross, but so funny. So what eventually happens is the more and more we have these Boxtrolls going out, eventually more of them end up getting taken. We have, of course, Wheels, who ends up getting taken. We end up having Oil Can, who eventually ends up getting taken. Eventually he is to go and oil up some door to stop it from creaking, and then when he closes the door, we have one of the guys going and grabbing him. The one thing about Mr. Gristle and Mr. Trout and Mr. Pickles Mr. Pickles, the kind of the skinnier one that's right here, he consistently goes on about whether they are the good guys or the trolls or the bad guys or not. He doesn't know which one is which consistently. We kind of have like Mr. Trout, where we kind of see he's like the bigger of the three, but it honestly doesn't feel like we really needed this character. Like I don't know really what he's for here, besides having just this goofy etched like nose. We have Mr. Gristle, who or Gristle, who goes on and like repeats everything that he's going to do and says it, which I think is just kind of weird. Uh, I don't know. I guess this guy does like he has to like say what he's doing weirdly. So yeah. So Snatcher goes on and starts collecting all of these characters, and so they have so few trolls now that Eggs has to go out there wearing his kind of weird, like goggled, like aviator hat, and going out there with the trolls to kind of look at night and try to find things. And so we have Lord Portly Rind, who now has a daughter that's called Winnie, and so she is to hear something at night, and she is to go run to her father while her father is going eating some assortment of cheeses in his tasting room. And so Winnie is desperately telling her father, like, "Hey, like, I think there's a troll out there. What are you gonna do, Dad?" And so Poorly Rind isn't gonna really do much of anything. Like, "Oh no, I'm sure it's not the trolls." Like, no. And so Winnie's like, "Well, what are you gonna do, Dad? If they're gonna come in here and eat me, what are you gonna do? Tear me apart and whatever?" And Poorly's just like, "Oh, like, could you go and take my hat and clean it?" Like that's all he really cares about, because he's not really paying attention to his daughter at all. It's kind of like patting her on the head and not really paying attention. So when he goes and takes her father's hat and chucks it out the window, but then realizes that's a stupid thing to do. So then she goes all the way outside to go and retrieve this hat, finding out that Snatcher is right there, to see this girl pick up this hat and tell her, like, "Hey, like, you're outside of curfew, and now I'm going to go out of my way to tell your father that you are doing this so I can go and get some brownie points with your dad." But before Winnie is to see Snatcher, she goes on and sees Eggs. And so Eggs is to go and like kind of prop his goggles up and like, huh? Because like the way of which that Winnie is to look at her at Eggs, Eggs is to look at Winnie the same way. So eventually what happens here is Eggs, of course, is to run away from the Snatchers, or the Snatcher. And so what ends up happening is Snatcher goes in with Winnie to tell exactly her father what had happened. And so Poorly Rind is to find out that he has like some like black smudges on his hat, and so he cleans it and he's like, like. So we of course have Snatcher desperately trying to come up with some kind of way of him to get a possible white hat eventually. And so we go on and have a Snatcher eventually more and more trying to get these trolls. And so now we eventually have it to where there's so few left, where it's really just Eggs and Fish and Shoe. And it gets down to where eventually Shoe is to finally be taken. And so now Eggs is to go off and desperately try to find fish and to save like fish. So we rarely have eggs who's to dress up as a like one of those like good old fashioned uh like barber shop quartet like singers, where he has like the hat and he has the weird curly mustache and he has like the suit on and whatever, and he's like, yeah, like I'm now dressed like a human. And so he goes out of the sewer to then find there is a like technically a concert going on in this town, where we have this one musician called Frou Frou who is to sing about the menace of the trolls and the horror story of that, and she's singing along. And we end up finding out that Frou Frou, I'm like, why does this look so familiar? And Frou Frou is actually Snatcher dressed up as a woman, and we end up having a really funny like thing going on later in this movie where Snatcher, of course, is dressed as Frou Frou, and he's saying all these lines that is like, I'm gonna be like after I go and I take you out, they're gonna like I'm gonna be the real man of this town, and like we have him consistently throwing in these like man puns while he's dressed up as a woman, and I thought that that was hilarious. And so we go on and we have Frou Frou doing this concert about the trolls and mentioning how a menace they are. And so Eggs is going and shouting and saying, like, no, like, none of this stuff is true. None of this story is true. And one guy who's in the concert is looking at this kid with death eyes and just like, no, like, shut up, kid. So Eggs eventually goes on and re-stumbles into Winnie. And so Winnie's like, oh, hey, like, who are you, pickpocket? She gives him a coin. Just be like, hey, become a better pickpocket next time around. And so now Eggs is to go on and tell Winnie who he really is. And so Winnie's like, oh, well, I need to go with you to the underground to, like, to see trolls. And I need to, like, see this all for myself. I need to see the whole truth. So we now have Winnie going underground to find whatever trolls are eventually to be left here. And so she realizes that all the stories are all a lie, that there wasn't a huge, massive stack of bones, and like there weren't rivers of blood and all kinds of things. And so she eventually is to kind of change her opinion about these Boxtrolls. It doesn't even seem like any one of them are either going to attack Eggs or Winnie. And so she's just like, okay, this just doesn't make any sense. What I was told and what I was led to believe is all a lie. So Winnie then is to now take whatever's left of all the trolls' stuff and is to go on and make Eggs a proper human suit, so that way he can go to this party and convince people that that all these stories are to be false and they're not the real legitimate truth here. So we then go on and have Eggs going to this party, and he is to have to try and fit in. And so Winnie is kind of telling him to shake people's hand and tell them it's a pleasure to meet them, even though it may not be true or not. So Eggs is going on into this party, shaking people's hand and like telling them it's like, oh, it's nice to meet you, whether that's true or not. like and plus he's like shaking his hands in front of people and he's being so awkward. And then he goes on and finds all these cheeses, and he's going through here and just eating all these cheeses, and then he realizes how much of a pig he's technically being. And so like we end up seeing this kind of gross, I'll admit it, it's a kind of gross scene where he goes and puts all the cheese, let's just say back onto a plate. And he's like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm going to take this fork and eat it. And everybody's like, oh, that's probably the grossest scene in this whole movie. Besides the whole, like, shoes and he has bugs all over him. Like, gross. So we eventually have Lord Portly Rind showing up at this party with this big, massive wheel of cheese that's like the size of like 3 people. It's so big. It's such a massive wheel of cheese. And so all of a sudden, Eggs is dancing with Winnie. And so all of a sudden, Eggs, of course, is to see Frou Frou here. And of course, Eggs is to realize this is Frou Frou. So let's back up a little bit also. So Eggs was to go off and retrieve fish that had gone missing. And so when Eggs went and tried to retrieve fish, we end up having him stumbling upon this exterminator building that the Snatcher and everybody was to be living in. And so he ends up finding the truth about the villains here, that what they actually did is they're keeping every single one of the Boxtrolls and they're having them build some mecha drill machine. Some kind of weird, goofy machine that Snatcher is to go on and use to, I guess, either intimidate this town or to take down every last stitch of these Boxtrolls. And so we go on and have Eggs going and finding the truth. And so Snatcher is to go and find Eggs. And so now Snatcher is to be like, oh my god, it's true, there really is a human Boxtroll. And so they go on, and when Frou Frou is to go after Eggs and chase him around in this party, we have Snatcher who's going on and to tell Eggs the truth. That Eggs was to... Fish tells Eggs the truth here. And so the truth of the story is that Fish goes on and is with Eggs' father, and it seems that Eggs' father, Trubshaw, was to be an inventor. And so these trolls would eventually go on and help Trubshaw, and eventually Trubshaw was in hot water with these exterminators because he wouldn't build them something they wanted. And so they decided to, it seemed, murder him, but when we turn around, we eventually just find out that he is to just be held upside down and chained up for a very long time until, I guess, he is to die. So, and Eggs, once he is to eventually be caught towards the end of this film, is to find out that this guy hanging upside down, who's kind of a little bit loony, is actually his father. And he's like, oh, so this guy wasn't killed, like he was just kind of just held here for a long time. So, which immediately you can, like, you easily know that. You can easily figure that out. So, because Eggs, once going into this party, is to go on and accidentally have this cheese wheel eventually off its table, and then it goes through this party and goes on to crash into the water. And so now we have Lord Portly Rind, who's telling that the other White Hats are going to have to go now and retrieve that wheel of cheese from the water, and like say, "What now? I ain't doing that." But eventually they end up finding it towards the very end of the film, but it all becomes a mood point of a thing when they do find it. So we end up also finding out that Snatcher is to have an allergy to cheese. Every time he needs to eat the cheese, he becomes this kind of like this like blowed up variation of himself, kind of like very like as if he has some kind of weird allergy to it, but he just like craves more and more of it, and he gets like addicted. So we find that out here when Snatcher is to go and eat some cheese with the other people to try and be like the guys in the white hats. So Eggs ends up getting caught by Snatcher, and so eventually what ends up happening is eventually all the Boxtrolls end up getting taken, and so Snatcher is going on and deciding that he's going to crush all of them in one fell swoop. And so Eggs is saying like, "Hey, like guys, like figure out a way to like get out of here. Like you guys can do it. Like don't be intimidated by this guy. Don't be intimidated by uh this Snatcher-esh like character. Don't fear him." And so all the Boxtrolls end up getting crushed. And so now Snatcher with his mecha drill, like big robot like thing, is going with Eggs into town. It is now making his way to Lord Portly Rind and mention to him like, "Hey, like all the Boxtrolls are all now dead. Look at all these boxes. Like I have taken all of them, and the only real Boxtroll that I have left is just this one Eggs one, where now he's wearing this costume that looks like a troll." So like you would have thought that like you would have thought Eggs would have probably kept that little costume, so that way he could like, yeah, I'm still like technically I can be a troll and look more like these guys and whatever. So but also be a boy also. So we have Eggs who's seemingly kind of teeter-tottering from being burnt alive. And so we eventually have Winnie, who's trying to seduce Snatcher with this white hat. And we eventually have the two other exterminator guys kind of chucking around this white hat from one another, or towards one another, and Snatcher is consistently going after it. So eventually we end up finding out that the Boxtrolls were still alive, but they no longer have their boxes on them, because they were all hiding inside of their boxes and then found a way to escape out of this pot they were getting squeezed in. And so now they're trolls without boxes. And so they're going out and they're like, "Yeah, let's go and let's beat down this this Snatcher character. Let's go and let's do this." And so the trolls all go on, and Eggs is to tell them that they need to go and try and tear apart this mech drill because they built it, so now they can take it apart. So they're starting slowly but surely to all take it apart, but Snatcher has so many things in this mech drill thing to like spin all of them around to where like all of them are kind of falling off one by one. So eventually this wheel of cheese ends up coming in, and so both Snatcher and Eggs fall into this big massive wheel of cheese after Eggs is to figure out a way to have this this one arm that is to be this like suction part of this mech drill go into the sewer to get all this water and to toss it into the fiery part of this mech drill, this kind of furnace part, and take this mech drill down to where both Eggs and Snatcher go flying into this cheese. And now we, of course, have Snatcher, who has a severe allergy to cheese, so his body's all blowing up. And so now that, of course, Snatcher is to have this allergy and he's grabbing on to Winnie, and now he's telling Lord Portly to give him this white hat in order for him to get his daughter back. And so Lord Portly Rand is like, okay, take my hat. So Snatcher goes on and is to test cheese in this tasting room. And so everyone is telling him, like, hey, like hats shouldn't matter anymore. Like, nothing should really matter anymore. Like, being able to accomplish this one deed, like, should not matter. And, like, you should just be happy who you are. And so Snatcher is not exactly convinced, so he eats this one last thing of cheese, and then he just explodes in this room. He's just a cheese explosion going on. And so now that Snatcher is now gone from his cheese-esh-like explosion, we then have it to where, like, they abolish the whole hat thing. Like, everybody's to live happy ever after. All the Boxtrolls are kind of safely mixing it in with all of the people. And so we eventually have Eggs going on with Trubshaw in this little like horse and buggy like thing. And so Trubshaw is, of course, making up for lost time, and he's going to spend some time with his kid. And along with that, like, there's some, of course, Boxtrolls that are going along with this. So, like, that's just kind of way the movie just kind of rides off into the sunset with eventually now Trubshaw, who's kind of regained his sanity and also gotten himself a massive haircut from how, like, he was to go on and consistently say, jelly, 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 to where he is going on and wearing this box that says jelly on it, and I thought that that was kind of funny. So, so that's how the movie kind of fizzles out or finishes off. And so you would have thought that, like, Eggs and Winnie would have, like, ended up together, but, like, I guess it does technically do that, but, like, it's also technically a family, let's just say, movie. So, like, it wasn't going to be that they're going to lop lips at the end of this. They did dance in this movie. They did have a pretty good time, but that's all that's really left there. We do have some end credit scenes, but it's really just, like, the two, Mr. Pickles and Mr. Trotter going through and kind of showcasing us the actual stop motion process and how, like, it takes them a long time to just do a wink or this or that, and dancing and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, that's all that really, like, goes on to the ending of this. So with that said, I think I'm gonna get out of here so I can go on and do other things. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Hopefully I got everything. I feel like there was some points in time there where I kind of had to, like, re-go back into certain parts of the story because I don't think I did it, like, quite perfectly. But, like, good enough. Like, oh, well, I didn't get this perfectly. Like, there's a lot of times where I just don't really, like, notch down second-to-second stuff or take little cliff notes or whatever things that I would normally do at some points. This one I kind of freeballed it, or just kind of free went into it, winged it. But yeah, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.